All right. I ask everybody to get on your laptop, etc. One quick announcement before we get going. Boy, I hope that's it. Yes, I'm still in the video. My face is cut off a little bit. There is the Philip Millar VFW Post 8549. That's the one here in Eden. VFW, what does that stand for? What? It's okay to get wrong. You know, I actually get points if you try to answer the question even if you're wrong. And by points, I mean mentally, you know, at the end of the day, everybody's not kind of close to the next grade. And I remember, I said, yeah, you know what, they tried. They weren't always right, but that's okay. Sometimes we learn most when we're wrong. So, VFW.
Veterans of Foreign Wars.
Veterans of Foreign Wars. Almost everybody got credit. Very good. Is sponsoring the Voice of Democracy audio contest, grades 9 through 12. That's you all, right? Do y'all know what that is? The Voice of Democracy topic this year is, have y'all heard this announcement? No? All right. Might want to take notes. Here's the topic. And you know what? It's probably your extra credit topic too. You may or may not turn in your audio thing, but if you want extra credit, always at least 10 points. Sometimes I give more than that. Is this the country the founders envisioned? That's the topic. Is this country, meaning currently, 21st century, is this the country the founders envisioned? Deadline is October 31st. We'll just make that the deadline for extra credit too. Entries will need to be in the high school office by noon on Friday, October 30. That's our deadline. Friday, October 30, noon. Please be sure entry forms are filled out and signed. Awards will be made locally. Winners advance to the next level of competition. I think there's money involved. I don't know what else is involved. So, entry forms, you can visit vfw.org. I think forms are coming and will be in the office soon. Got a lot, so it may be next week, maybe, because the volunteer who's coordinating all of that travels some. She's a retired teacher. Okay? What's your first reaction to that based on what you know? Is this the country the founding fathers envisioned? And mothers, we just know most of the men, but women were involved too. So don't ever feel bad, ladies. True? Yes or no? No. I would tend to want to answer it that way. Now, there are elements where I would say yes, and here's why I would say yes. I think no is the more obvious answer, but why might I say yes to that question? This is the country the founders envisioned. What do we have?
Constitution is over.
We have a constitution that guides our government, absolutely. What else? What's the basic thing we still have? Freedom. What? Laws, absolutely. So, in one sense, yes. I'm not sure our founders of America, well, you know they couldn't have envisioned us about to all get online, logging into the server. You know what I mean? I mean, they couldn't have done that. However, I do think they saw the big picture. So never despise. It's just like Steve Jobs developed with Apple. I think he grew into the thing, but I'm not sure in the beginning they envisioned, well, what's a fairly recent thing that especially your generation seems to love in some regards? What's it called?
Phones.
Phones, yes, but what do you do on your phone? Where do you go on your phone? Social media. I mean, in the beginning, no, they never saw that. That's why Mark Zuckerberg is a billionaire plus. He saw something that no one else had seen before. you know what, if we do this, does that make sense? So, all right, big deals. I do not have all the tests graded. Not all the tests have been taken. You took a test in here. The 2 students who took it online, well done. Way to get in, get the class done, etc. I posted what online? For everyone to take. Discussion questions. Not every one of you did that. Why? Let's be honest, because some of you didn't do it, and my concern is, that's why I want to take class time today, my concern is you don't know where you're going or what you're doing. So everybody, is everybody aware you know how to get there? All right, I'll minimize this and go to mine. I was at it a while ago. All right, everybody, I'm on the announcement page. But for some reason, it's not showing me up there. Okay, now I want to see that. Why isn't it showing? Anybody know why it won't do that? Why is it not mirroring what I have? All right, I don't know. So, but you're there, okay? Everybody, what do you see? I'll just walk around and I'm going to talk you through. What's the first announcement? What's at the top of the announcement page? Everybody knows how to scroll down? You should have, do you have a content folder on the left? Everybody click on content, tell me what you see.
There's no content.
What?
There's no content.
No content. Was there?
Yes.
The reason it disappears is because the due date's over. However, now go into, all right, what I intended to do, let's see if Marty did it right. Discussion questions. You don't show a discussion question? Under your content? You do not see the quiz 1 discussion questions? All right. Let me All right. Where elsewhere? Are the announcements gone too?
It just shows quiz 1 info.
What?
It just shows quiz 1 info.
Quiz 1 info is all you see? Do you have a test? Can you scroll down on the left side and find test? All right, I'm going to student view on mine because I have tried to make, all right, I see quiz 1 info. I have tried to make the discussion questions, yep, you don't have anything there, available to you again. Okay. Bottom line is, I will make sure I do that. I'm not seeing my little. Okay. I give up. I'll have to find out why it's not showing, even though I have edited the due date. lost my touchpad.
We can, your mouse was moving.
Yeah, I know. Why did it move over there? There it is. All right, I went too far. You know what? I'm extending, not mirroring. I imagine that's what's going on. All right, let's see if I add a new announcement, if it will give you the link. I found it. All right. Is it there? Refresh and see if it's there. Okay, if you haven't completed it, then you need to go right there, click on sometime before midnight on Thursday, and make sure you do the discussion questions. You can't afford not to do that. That's the same place you will see. Now the first discussion is gone. I may make it available. You need to check. Remember, the due date was Friday or Saturday or something on discussion number 1. You can't afford to throw away 50 points here, there, whatever. We only get 1,000 this whole term. That sounds like a lot, but you only get 1,000. So therefore, the difference between making 90 or above is how many points? We'll play math class. How many point after how many points do you move into B? 100, exactly. Does that make sense? So if you blow off 50 points, 30 points, I mean, you're not going to get all the questions right. Okay, you're just not, I promise. You know, rarely. I graded the first discussion questions, those that I have graded, and I'm going to go back through. The reason I'm waiting, and we will talk through quiz number 1 on Friday, because we're taking 2 tests within the next 10 days, 12 days. Okay, we're going to make those online for everyone. Okay, so quiz 2 and then exam number 1. Are you tracking with me? Quiz 2 will be over chapters 4 and 5. Exam 1 is going to be over what? 1 through 5. Okay, it's going to be all of it. We're going to go back and recapture the first 3 chapters information. Okay, you'll have longer to take it. There'll be longer questions. But I'm going to make both of those online for everybody. So you get to do it at home. Yes, if anybody asks, you can use whatever materials. I did discover 1 or 2 who tried to copy and paste. Guess what it looks like when you try to copy and paste? Anybody know? It looks like you tried to copy and paste. Okay? Because rarely are you that good to figure out, change the font, and make it the same font as black, but I mean, I just can tell. I don't want you copy and paste it. I would rather have less of your own typing with quality info than for you to try to copy and paste things, okay? If you have questions, contact a classmate, contact me, but you can't ignore the online element of this class. This is part of, because guess what? I've got a nephew, first year of college, Texas State University down in San Marcos. He's enrolled in 5 classes, and guess how many of them are face-to-face? 1. The other 4 are fully online. Everything's online. Okay? So you just got to figure this world out. I hope you go on to college. I hope you get not just an associate's degree, but a bachelor's degree, maybe a master's degree. I don't know. But anyway. So, any questions right now about our class? Yes.
Okay, so for the discussion questions, if we've already done them, you don't want to...
Correct. If you've already done them, it's done. Some of you had trouble, and as soon as you have trouble, you can email me or you can text me. I think I put my cell phone, it's an 806 number out there. That's not, you're not going to bother me. That's part of the deal. It's part of what I sign up for when I teach. You know, so if you have catastrophic trouble, now, if it's not displaying the text boxes to write in, you better make sure you double check all your settings and the like. It was funny, my daughters who are now, you know, in their early 30s and whatever, it was funny when they were younger as teenagers, they said, I'm having so much trouble with my computer. And I said, well, have you updated things? Oh, really? Do I need to do that? Yeah, you need to do that. That's not a hassle and a headache, and you need to update your software, update I mean, you just have to. So, anyway, sometimes Blackboard is just finicky. Sometimes there's too many users. I don't know the details of Howard College. Other schools I've taught for with Blackboard. Sometimes it's just everybody's, it's got 50% or 70% online at the same time type deal. Sometimes it overloads the system, but if you have technical issues, once is probably, everybody gets a pass one time. If it recurs, either you're trying to look at the test and get back in it, I'll have to start giving different, you know what I mean? I know none of you would be dishonest and try to cheat. I hope not. You know why you shouldn't cheat? Do some people cheat and get away with it? Yeah. But guess what they know the rest of their life? I cheated. I mean, really. I mean, that's just, that's a part of what happens to people. They have this buildup of things when they know they have done something illegal or immoral that really they know is wrong. So, all right. Any questions? Any trouble? Midnight Thursday for these discussion questions, which means you have 38 hours. So, all right, no questions? Then let's go. Since that's what loves to show on my TV up here. Then let's go. There we go, chapter 4. Empire in transition. I hope you have read the text. You need to. The colonies actually, like many other groups, were fairly loosely connected. Does that make sense? They knew, travel, communication. They didn't pick up the phone and call somebody and stay in touch with their relatives down in Georgia, even though they lived up in New Hampshire. You know what I mean? Communication was different. It was slower. And so there were all sorts of things that I think went into the equation, if you will, when it came to life in the colonies. I want to give you a quick, I talked about those factors. By the way, if you think you probably don't need to review my lectures unless you think you missed something. So, quick overview of the First Great Awakening happened about when? Give me a round date. Give me the century. The First Great Awakening was a general, widespread spiritual renewal that happened about when? Think about your dates. What?
Late 1500s.
Late 1500s? That's a good guess. Not quite right.
Early 1600s. Early 1600s.
Okay, keep going, though. What's happening? You said early 16, right? What happened in the early 1600s?
At first, English settlement.
Exactly. First English settlement was where?
Jamestown.
Jamestown. Okay, so we're just showing up then. When did the Puritans come over, and Plymouth Rock, and the first Thanksgiving with the Indians who had helped keep those English settlers alive? 1620. First Thanksgiving was probably 1621. That's the early 1600s. Okay, people come over more and more during the 1600s, but life is at a slower pace. They don't have a new iPhone every other year with all of these updates, some of which I like, some of which I don't. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? I mean, everything moved a lot slower. So when did the population grow enough, develop enough in the colonies? There was change throughout the various colonies. You remember there were different types of colonies, remember they were organized differently. What was unique about Pennsylvania? Who primarily settled there? William Penn was the leader. Quakers, that's right. So they had their own religious beliefs, convictions. No, the First Great Awakening happened. you want a round number, 1725. That's kind of a general round. 1725. So we're into the 1700s are called what century? 18th century. Because the first century was in the winds. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Okay, there wasn't 100. So with the hundreds, AD 100 begins the second century. You understand that? That's why historians refer to that, and it can be confusing if you don't get that down in your head. 18th century means 1700s. Now, when we're going backwards, it's the opposite. So if it's the 8th century BC, it's what hundreds? 700s, exactly. Does that make sense? So counting down is just the opposite from counting up. We're in the 21st century, but the date is 20. Okay, you with me? All right, so it's in the early 18th century that the First Great Awakening, and the reason it's called that, our textbook mentions it, but it was called a Great Awakening because it affected everybody, every colony, hundreds, if not thousands of people in every colony, and it happened because by the time of the early 1700s, in the early part, the first quarter of the 18th century, people's religion had begun to fade. You know, the kids decided, well, that was kind of the religion of my parents, and the grandkids said, well, gosh, my parents really don't go that much, so I'm not going to go. And so really, and a part of it was church attendance, but it was more than that. They had just become very complacent religiously. George Whitefield was one of the key preachers. John Wesley, Charles Wesley, his brother, were other key leaders in the Great Awakening. And by key leaders, I meant they were the key preachers. They literally traveled. Everybody hopped on a train, right? No. They got on horseback and they traveled around and had big meetings. They had big gatherings of people, etc. Jonathan Edwards was one of the key, also another key preacher in that. Northampton, Massachusetts, he pastored a church, and he became convicted, as many others did, that people's faith had faltered. It wasn't a part of their daily life. They were behaving badly. They were not just, anyway, it just was not a good time. Actually, what had happened in New England, Massachusetts in particular, churches had developed what they called the halfway covenant. I don't see too much writing, and I don't know why you wouldn't be writing, because sometimes the teacher will ask these details on a test. Now, if you plan to watch me later, I think we're getting a good video, so that'll work. The halfway covenant said, well, even though you haven't made any kind of decision or commitment to the church, we'll still put you on the roll. And so the context of the First Great Awakening, about 1725, that's the round number I'd expect you to know, was the fact that Jonathan Edwards began to preach about commitment. One of, if not his most famous sermon, is entitled, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And some of the details of this awakening, he actually read, even maybe worse than your history professor, he literally read his sermon. But in that sermon, he described so vividly that God was upset with the lack of commitment, and he portrayed God as holding people over the flames of a fiery hell. What happened in the First Great Awakening, and that's true, in about 100 years, we're going to have the Second Great Awakening. But in that First Great Awakening, many people returned to their faith. Okay, they returned to their commitment to not just to God, but also to the church. And what happened? What happened in Edwards Church in Northampton, Massachusetts was, as he read his sermon, sometimes didn't even look up. As he read his sermon, people began to wail and weep. They grabbed a hold to the support poles that had held the roof up. And actually what had happened was there was this movement, Christians would say, of the Holy Spirit, but there was this great conviction that came upon people in general. And so they had these series of meetings. Whitefield was a traveling evangelist, would be the name. By the way, just as a side note, we get our English word evangelist or evangelism from the Greek word euangelizomai, and it literally means tell good news. And so they went around and preaching, and there was this great movement of back to Christianity, general, big, broad terms. Everybody had their own unique thing, just like Quakers in Pennsylvania and the like. Catholics in some groups, Baptists, other Methodists, other Protestants. Actually, Methodism grew from whom? Who was the founder of Methodism? John Wesley. And it is in the aftermath of the First Great Awakening, when Wesley returned to England, he began to organize people who were coming to faith, hence the Methodist Church. But Baptists had a bigger beginning. There were also, of course, what would become Presbyterians in the United States, which was and Anglicans. We know Anglicans was the Church of England, and in America they were known as, starts with an E, the Episcopalian Church, but they would have been Anglicans at the First Great Awakening. So that's the quick skinny on the First Great Awakening. It matters because you had this movement where it was, I believe, the First Great Awakening was one of the pieces of the puzzle of pulling the colonies closer, because this went all the way up through the colonies. It wasn't localized to one colony. It was everywhere. I talked about Massachusetts. It happened all the way down through Virginia, the Carolinas, and the like. So it was one of those, I think, galvanizing movements as people came to faith, back to their faith, that helped unite the colonies in a way that heretofore had not been true. Another thing that is going on, let me just start with that. There was a series of wars between France and England. True or false? France and England have always, for the most part, been at each other. True. Yeah, they have forever fought. Have you seen? Look them up on a map. See where England is basically a what? The country of England. The empire is called Great Britain because it goes a little farther, but the England itself is basically what? Basically an island. You know what I mean? So it's actually separate from much of Europe, and they have tended to think of themselves separately. But their great enemy throughout the centuries has been the French. The Spain were also a part of that mix because they were warring for what? What's going on in the 17th, 1700s, 17th, 18th centuries? We looked at that. What's happening? Colonization, which means they are fighting over the same land. Exactly. So, a series of wars between France and England. The Second 100 Years' War is from 1689 to 1815. It's called the Second 100 Years' War because it lasted, well, over 100 years. It's not exactly 100 years. That's just the name that historians have given to it, which means there was one earlier. We're not going to worry about that because this is the one that matters the most. Number one, the Second 100 Years' War was really a series of 8 to 10 wars. One of the most important was the French and Indian War of the 1700s. Where did the French and Indian War take place? What? In America. In the colonies. In what we'd call North America nowadays. But yeah, the French and Indian War. What was another part of that war? The 100 Years' War. There were 8 to 10 separate but connected wars that basically were between the British, England, and France. What was another one? The French and Indian War, 1750s and 60s. Then what? The Revolutionary War. Why is that a part of the 100 Years' War between France and England? Wasn't that the fight of American colonists for independence? Yes. But who joined the colonists just a couple of years into the war? The French did. Exactly. That meant they sent resources, they sent manpower, they sent ships. Exactly. So that was really another part of this 100 Years' War, the War for American Independence. What was another one that is significant in American history?
Civil?
Huh?
Was Civil War in there or no?
No. It's over. 100 Years' War actually only goes to 1850. It's the last major part of this 100-year war, which I said was what? It was actually 8 or 10, 8, 9, or 10, depending on how you want to describe it, separate wars. Do the words "Oh say, can you see" mean anything to anybody? Star Spangled Banner. When did Francis Scott Key pen the words to the Star Spangled Banner? Do you remember? Y'all want to sing it together? Oh say, can you see by the dawn's early light? And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that what? Our flag was still there. You know when he wrote it? During the War of 1812. That was the last major piece of this 100 Years' War between France and England, the War of 1812, which happened over here. They were all part of this continuing fighting between England and France. That's my point. And that is significant because I believe it would have been almost impossible without the help of the French for the American Revolutionary Army to have defeated England. It was a significant help. And it also, perhaps even as important as the fighting assistance, the stuff with the actual help with the war itself, was what did France do for these colonies, they weren't states yet, these colonies that legitimized the fight? In terms of the view of the world,
They used them as an independent.
exactly. They acknowledged them as sovereign. Now, were they yet? No, but they acknowledged them as such, and so it gave legitimacy and credibility to them. All right, let me talk quickly about the French and Indian War. 1754 to 1763. The Frenchmen were missionaries and traders. There were only about 50,000 of them in North America. Anybody remember how many Englishmen, people from England, there were in America at the time? Between 2.5 and 3 million. 50,000 Frenchmen, 2.5 or 3 million Englishmen. 7,000 Spanish were in North America at this time. So what happened to the Spanish influence? Pretty much after when? The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. It just dwindled and dwindled because Spain as a country lost power and influence, wealth, and so forth. So the French got along with the Indians, Englishmen didn't. Kind of a very simplified view, of course, but on the whole, the French tried to get along, tried to trade with the Indians, while as Englishmen did not. So, basically, rich Virginians asked the King of England for land in the year 1750. It was around Fort Duquesne. The King of France also claimed the land as well. So we have Englishmen, rich Virginians asking the King of England for the land. You also have the King of France who has claimed that land in and around what was known as Fort Duquesne. George Washington surveyed the land for the Virginians. Where was he from? Where did he live?
England.
George Washington? No. In Virginia. He was a Virginian. Mount Vernon is in Virginia. All right, the French governor heard about it, sent people to protect the land. The Virginia troops are sent in and beaten beaten back, defeated in 1754, therefore the war was on. Okay, with the battle, with the skirmish. George Washington had long since been a military man. This was not his finest hour. In case you wonder, sometimes we romanticize people and we put them on pedestals they don't belong on anyway. Not that they shouldn't be honored. It's not that they don't maybe deserve a statue, but they were not perfect. And George Washington was not. He was not born the perfect general. He wasn't. No, he made his mistakes, looked foolish, was beaten more than once. So, General Braddock was the best general the English had. They had the best militia, known as what? What were they called? England's militia, fighting men. They wore what? Red what? Coats. They were called the red coats because they wore red coats. Okay, that became depending on which side you were on, that's either a thing of honor or derision. But the red coats to fight the French and their Indian allies. Pretty much in the 1750s, the French were defeating the British, coming and going. It is primarily because there was a new way of fighting in the New World that was not true to European wars. European wars, what was the standard method of fighting? Guns, rifles, true. But how did they go about fighting? What? They lined up. Is that what you were saying? Yeah, they just lined up and shot at each other. That was the European way of fighting. And so, of course, now what the Indians knew the terrain and knew the land, Native Americans, that's how they got around. And so that was really, we found for really the first evidence in America that how the European mode of fighting was not going to work. People always embrace change, right? True or false? False. England was perhaps the very slowest to embrace change. In fact, they were still fighting the European way when the next big war with France came around. The what? The American Revolutionary War. That's part of the reason that we could end up defeating them so well, was because they were so very slow to adapt to fighting in this new world in North America. They wanted to line up and shoot people. And of course they had cannon, so they could fire cannons, but if you don't know where the people are, how good's a cannonball? It's not. And so, that was a critical element in all of this. William Pitt said that he and he alone could turn this around. He was very well organized. He organized the collection of taxes, military, and now after 2 years, Britain was winning everywhere. This is during the French and Indian War again, William Pitt. However, he marched back to Fort Duquesne. He ended up capturing it, renamed it Fort Pitt. Why would William Pitt name it Fort Pitt? After himself, exactly. He was the general, he was the leader for Great Britain, and ended up, that became what? What do we call it now? Pittsburgh. Fort Pitt became known as Pittsburgh, and sure enough, Great Britain ended up having this huge empire because they turned the tide. William Pitt was the key leader of the army, and they defeated the French in the French and Indian War. Briefly, let me talk about the British government, the English government, because that matters. Number one, they had a hereditary king. What does that mean? In the family, that's right. It was just, a relative of who had been king, so that's a significant thing. Number two, they had an elected parliament. This is Great Britain or England. They had an elected parliament, at least part of it was. They had two main parties, political parties. Number one was the Tory party, and they were on the side of the king. Secondly was the Whig party, and they were what? What stance did they take? They opposed the king. Yeah. So the Tory party was on the king's side. The Whig, W-H-I-G, the Whig party opposed the king. Secondly, those are the political parties. Secondly, there were ministers of government, leaders of the majority party, 6 to 8, depending on the year, depending on the time. And the number one leader was called still to this day, in Great Britain, who's the leader? Huh? Prime Minister, exactly. That was called back then too. So, the ministers of government, the number one leader is called the Prime Minister of the government. Number 3, hereditary king. Number 2, elected parliament. Number 3, virtual representation. Because some Englishmen somewhere in the world elected parliament, that parliament therefore represented all Englishmen everywhere in the world. Are you with me? The whole notion that virtually every Englishman was representative because some Englishman somewhere had a representative or had a relative who had elected the parliament. Are you with me? That whole concept of what I call virtual representation. In the Middle Ages, parliament was distracted. Distributed, maybe that's the right word, when most people lived in southern and eastern England. So, when most of the people lived in southern or eastern England, it was districted. That's the word I was really looking for. Districted that way. Okay, different districts, just like we have what?
Counties.
We have counties. What do we have? What does the House of Representatives have? Don't make it hard. Districts. That's what we call them. Okay? The 9th district, the 12th district, Okay? So we still had that same structure in America. By 1750, the population in England had dispersed, and the northern districts in England were not proportionately represented. Parliament had yet to redistrict the country. Many Englishmen were not represented. I say that to say this is going on in England, and communication. People in America, did they ever talk with people in England? They actually did. Communication was slow. They would have family or extended family still there. There was communication going back and forth. Why? Because in the 1750s, what was America? Or actually, officially in 1763, what did America officially become? No, somebody said independent. No. There were 13 colonies of what country?
United States.
England. In 1763, at the end of the French and Indian War, the French and Indians were fighting against the Englishmen. William Pitt led the charge, and England won power. They won the war, they won control. Therefore, America becomes the sole property, if you will, of England. So what's going on is this discussion and debate in England about proper representation. That discussion in England, that's the reason I talk about it, would spill over into where? Granted, across the pond, as we say, into America. So it is that environment, that's what I'm saying, that environment is what set up the conversation for what would eventually lead to the revolution. All right, clean your tables. Call with questions. Make sure you get the discussion done if you haven't. We will debrief. Quiz 1 on Fridays. Thank you.